Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jacqueline, for the introduction and for the audience. So I'm going to present on payment for ecosystem services. That has been mentioned. I'm an intern at Chemfree. Next slide. So I'm connecting my presentation to the earlier presentations from Dr. Obura, Dr. Virginia, and Miss Lillian. Yesterday, when they talked about the seagrass critical ecosystem along the coastline, for which the coastal ecosystem connectivity and how it impacts, how the human activities impact in this ecosystem. So, as I've been mentioned, mangroves, seagrasses, and corals are the critical ecosystems, and human activities can impact positively or negatively on these ecosystems. So, in the essence that we have got destructive human activities towards these ecosystems, they lead to loss of mangroves and seagrasses and the biodiversity that is within. And this loss of mangroves and seagrasses may consequently lead to sedimentation and increased nutrient input in the coral reef ecosystems, leading to their loss. And this will lead to loss of ecosystem services that are provided by these ecosystems, including decreased of storm buffering, decreased fisheries, tourism, and storm buffering. And these may, again, impact negatively on the socioeconomic livelihoods and also lead to changes in coastal population. And therefore, there is need to conserve this ecosystem. Specifically, in Kenya, we have about 9 species of mangroves, 12 species of seagrasses, and over 300 species of corals. And it is considered one of the biodiversity hotspot along the East African coastline. Hence, different management measures need to be taken into consideration for them to thrive and continue providing the ecosystem functionalities. Next slide. Therefore, payment for ecosystem service scheme or concept comes in as one of the management approach in which the communities are involved and they are incentivized to conserve this ecosystem. So PES schemes occur when the beneficiary, that who benefits from the services offered by the ecosystem, makes a direct or indirect payment to the provider or the person who conserves this ecosystem. Therefore, the idea is that whoever preserves or maintains the ecosystem is incentivized to do so, because the person who might be benefiting might be downstream, and then the upstream community conserve this ecosystem. And therefore, this ecosystem provides activities like watershed protection, as well as clean water services such as fish. And therefore, the community downstream can in turn pay through directly, it could be money or other incentives such as assistance to the communities upstream. So it enhances sustainability of the conservation of these ecosystems. Next slide. So when we talk of ecosystem services, we have 4 categories of these services, including provisioning services such as food and fiber, wood that is used for cooking in most of the Kenyan households. We have clean water, medicinal values. We also have supporting services such as soil formation, biodiversity conservation, primary production, habitat. Then we have regulating services such as climate regulation, pollination, carbon storage, and control of flooding, as well as cultural services that include recreational, aesthetic, education, and inspiration. And of all these ecosystem services, the services that we can see circled in red are the ones in which most PES schemes normally focus on. In other words, most of them focus on carbon storage and sequestration. For example, the Akoko Pamoja PES scheme in South Coastal Kenya. We have got biodiversity protection, where communities are paid when they're conserving certain biodiversity, such as where birds nest or the seals in northern Germany. We have got watershed where communities are paid to conserve watersheds that provide clean water to the southern communities or communities downstream, as well as those that are paid to conserve areas that provide recreational activities. Next slide. So for a PES scheme to be established, there are requirements that need to be ascertained or need to be met by the actors. And these include identifying the buyers, the market conditions, and it has to be well understood, the service provider, who has to be, even if it is the communities or the persons who conserve the ecosystems, and these have to be legally and institutionally recognized. So there are conditions, otherwise known as the principles, for which these PES schemes are established. And in this, I'm going to give much of the examples with Mikoko Pamoja, that has been mangrove carbon offsetting scheme in Kenya for the last 5 years. So, for example, in voluntary, the stakeholders enter into PES scheme agreements on a voluntary basis. So the buyers buy the carbon credits voluntarily. And for example, we have, for Mikoko Pamoja, we have voluntary buyers such as the DiCaprio Foundation. And then additionality in that the payments are made for actions over and above what the ecosystem could provide. In other words, a forest as it is, it can naturally store and sequester carbon, but then the communities are paid for the additionality to which they bring to that. And therefore, the PES scheme must provide the potential to increase supply for a particular service. And then another principle or conditions that need to be considered is the avoidance of leakage. And this is where PES schemes, when established, they might involve closing a given area to increase the functionality of the ecosystem in that area. But then this closure of a given ecosystem should not lead to degradation of another ecosystem. For example, if we close a given mangrove area, then we should not allow communities to degrade another area. So, for example, in Mikoko Pamoja, activities that have been done to enhance this avoidance of leakage include establishing Castuarina woodlots from which the communities can still harvest their woods. And also in the communities of Makongeni and Gazi in the south coast, Kemfree and other organizations have established efficient wood stoves. This reduces the leakage, reduces the pressure on mangroves. And then lastly, the need for permanence. And this is where the management interventions should not be readily reversible. For a system like carbon offset scheme, once the carbon is stored by establishing a good mangrove ecosystem, then this storage can be there for millennia. There are different scales of PES schemes. It can be international. For example, the REDD+, whereby developing countries that are willingly ready to pay to conserve their forests and reduce degradation are paid by developed countries. It can also be a national scale, on a national scale. For example, the Environmental Stewardship Program in the UK, whereby the government pays on behalf of the public to the farmers for sensitive climate smart agriculture. And then it can also be local or on neighborhood scale, whereby a given community, if they have a community forest, they can willingly pay to one of the guards or two to help in the conservation of that forest. So these requirements of PES should be considered before establishing a PES scheme. Next slide. So in Kenya, we have opportunities and challenges to establish these PES schemes. And depending on the requirements that are mentioned. For one, some of the opportunities that we have include government support. I think the government has been supportive for community interventions and the establishment of these PES schemes. And also, we have good science. For example, there is capacity to be able to undertake baseline studies or baseline surveys that are a requirement for establishment of these PES schemes, as well as partners that act as intermediaries between buyers and sellers. For example, Association for the Coastal Ecosystem, ACES, for Mikoko Pamoja has been a partner, as well as the partners who come in to assist in the establishment and also intermediate in the sale of carbon. And then there is also strong relevant policy and legal framework, because this is an important aspect in the establishment of a PES scheme. There should be legal and frameworks that are in line with the conservation and setting aside of these project areas. For example, membership with the Kyoto Protocol. So Kenya being a member, this is an opportunity for communities and stakeholders in Kenya to establish such PES schemes. There are also challenges that are normally there. For example, benefit sharing. In cases whereby different communities share a given ecosystem, and therefore they are to share the benefit, sometimes there can be misunderstandings on how to equally share the benefits. And then explaining the concept can sometimes be a challenge to the community, especially, for example, the concept of sale of carbon credits. If it is not well explained to the communities at the beginning and how the processes will be, then it might be taken differently, and this might lead to a failure of sustainability of such a project, or even its inception to completion. And then also community ownership of the project. In other words, in some cases, due to different tenure systems, especially those in the upland watersheds or even coastal communities, if this is not clear, then this might be challenges that can be experienced in the process of establishing payment for ecosystems schemes in Kenya or another place in the world, any other place. Next slide. So examples of working PES schemes in Kenya include the Mikoko Pamoja Mangrove Carbon Project, which was established in 2013 in south coastal Kenya, and it protects mangroves in about 117 hectares, and then they're able to sell these carbon credits and use this money to develop finance different developmental activities in the communities of Gazi and Makongeni. And then we have Gazi Women Mangrove Boardwalk. This is more of recreational, for which they also protect mangroves, and then they are able to get incentives for the same. Vanga Blue Forest Project is a replication of Mikoko Pamoja, which is in Vanga, involving Vanga, Jimbo, and Kiwegu communities in the south coastal Kenya. We have got the Mida Creek Community Project, and also for Vanga and Mikoko Pamoja, there is now the process of bundling seagrasses into carbon offset scheme in Kenya. And probably we are happy that this will be the first seagrass carbon offset schemes in the world. So we have opportunities. And at the same time, if we talk about the transboundary coastline, Chemfree and other partners from Tanzania and the WCS are working into replicating these PES schemes into Tanzanian communities up to Tanga. So this will help in the conservation of the transboundary coastline, as well as improve the community livelihoods in these areas. Next slide. So when linking PES schemes into marine spatial planning, we realize that in the process of developing these PES schemes and their implementation, a number of processes take place, as we've discussed, and these as well add onto what is required for a marine spatial plan. For example, in developing these PES schemes, mapping of the marine resources and project sites are required. And these already feed into marine spatial planning process, as well as conducting baseline surveys like biodiversity assessments, what resources or what biodiversity, what species are at what particular place, and how can we sustainably use these species, how do they benefit the local communities, how do they benefit the international communities. So such a process of doing the science or the baselines also help in the marine spatial planning process, and also community and other stakeholder consultation. Even from the yesterday's presentation, we realized that communities and different stakeholders, both government, private entities, they should all work together. Just as it is important in working together towards MSP, it is the same case with PES schemes, because if we have got coastal developers, if we have got the communities that live in these areas, they should all come together in enhancing conservation of this ecosystem. And therefore, we say that both PES schemes and MSPs aim at coordinated and sustainable use of ocean resources. Next slide. So in summary, coastal ecosystems are threatened, and therefore there is need for a good planning and management. And MSP is one of the steps through which this conservation can be achieved, since it informs a coordinated utilization of the ocean resources. And then PES schemes is important in the process. It can be considered because, for one, it enhances conservation of these ecosystems and increasing their functionalities, as well as improve the livelihood of communities that are found in the coastal areas. And it also enhances the community participation, because in a place where the Floridians are sensitized on these ecosystems and how they can be conserved, as well as how they can benefit from their conservation, I think it will be a smooth process for establishing marine spatial planning in such areas. Into the future, we can assess the options for more PES schemes and sustainability of the projects, as well as involve communities and different stakeholders in the processes of marine spatial planning and PES schemes. Next slide. Thank you for listening.